I'm going to pick up with question 10. All right, so again, we still have fractions in our denominator. Got to do our restrictions, so W can be any number except 2, because 2 minus 2 is going to make it 0. So what I'm going to do is, I don't like working with fractions, so I'm going to still stick with multiplying by least common multiple. I only have one denominator, so that's our least common denominator or least common multiple. I am going to multiply this side by that, and I'm going to multiply this side by that. Here, these cancel, and that's why we're doing that. So we get those to cancel out. I'm left with negative 1 equals negative 2W plus 4. Okay, so again, my W's already here on the right side, so I'm going to take my constant to the other side. But you can take your variable over there, so I'm going to subtract 4. And I get negative 5 equals negative 2W. I'm going to divide by negative 2. And I'm going to get W, I'm just going to write my W first. And that gives me a positive 5 halves. You can use 2.5 if you want. And that's not my restriction, so we should be good. I was trying to think if there was anything else. I don't think so. Okay, so here I'm going to multiply well, first of all, let's do the restrictions. My restrictions, x can be anything but a negative 3. How to get the restriction is you take the denominator and you set it equal to 0 and solve. So if I had equals 0, I would subtract 3 from both sides, and that's all it is. Same thing here. Okay. All right. Then my least common multiple. To find my least common multiple, I take my first denominator and I list it over here. So if I have anything different, I got to list it. But this one, I go to my next one. Do I already have it? Yes, so I don't need another one. And this one obviously doesn't have a denominator. It does, it's 1. So I'm going to multiply everything I see by that x plus 3. Now, again, I'm doing it here. If you want to just list it, like put 4, if you want to, you can do this. It's up to you. I've taught this in class like this. Okay, if you want to do this part over here, have at it, and you get 4. Okay, I just am lazy and don't want to write down each one of these, so those cancel, so I'm left with 4. I'm going to have my equal sign. These cancel, so I'm left with 6. And then I'm going to distribute my 2. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 3 is 6. So I'm going to have 4 equals 2x plus 12, because I'm going to combine the 2 6's together. Okay, this is a positive. Can't really see my plus sign anymore. My variables still on the right. All my variables, so I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to take my 12 over here. So I'm going to subtract 12. And I get 2x is equal to negative 8. Divide by 2. And x is equal to a negative 4. Again, you can take this and plug it in, and the left should give us the right. I'm just hoping that I'm not doing anything wrong because I don't have the answers. So, all right, next problem. Before I start, I'm going to factor. I can factor out a 3, and I'm left with v minus 6. Okay, so first thing, x cannot equal 6 there or 6 there. Sometimes you might have multiple things that, like in this one, you're going to have multiple ones. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm now going to find my least common multiple. I go to my first one and I list the v minus 6. Now I go to my next one. I have a 3. I have to list it over here as well. And then v minus 6, I already have one, so I don't have to worry about it. Okay, so my least common multiple is 3 times this v minus 6. So I'm going to put the 3 in front just because I like it when I do it over here. I like it in the front. Doesn't really matter though. So I'm going to multiply this one by that. I am going to multiply this one, everything I see, I'm going to multiply by 3 times the group of v minus 6. When I do that, those cancel. 3 times a negative 1 is negative 3. Right here, my 3's cancel. My v minus 6's cancel. So I'm left with a negative 2. Be careful, that's a negative. You might miss that. And then over here, this gives me 6. Okay? So 6 times v and 6 times a negative 6. So 6 times v is 6v. And 6 times a negative 6 is negative 36. Before I move anything, I'm going to combine. So I have negative 3 equals 6v minus 38. I'm going to move the 38 to the left because my variables are already on my right. So I'm going to do that by adding. I get 35 equals 6v divided by 6. And v is equal to 35 divided by 6. Okay, I was getting ready to say questions, like I'm teaching in class. Okay, next problem. So, right here, I've got a couple things that x is not allowed to be. I'll just use this blue. In this particular problem, x is not allowed to be 4. I don't know why I put, well, I'll just leave it up there. And x is not equal to, can't be a negative 3. Okay? Gotta separate these here. Okay. I get a little close. Okay, my least common multiple. I'm going to list my first denominator. Then I go to my next denominator. Do I have it? No, I don't. So I have to list it. Now something I forgot to do, because right here, I needed to have factored this to make sure I don't have something else I have to list. But this factors as x minus 4, x plus 3. So what I did was I listed my first one. Then I went to my next one. I didn't have it, so I had to list it. Then I go to my third one. I already have an x minus 4, and I already have an x plus 3. So that's my LCM. Everything that you have here, you're going to multiply by that. Now again, I'm going to do it really small over here. And I'm going to do that here. And I'm going to do it here. And again, you can do this work that I'm doing here like this over here. You would just rewrite all this, and you'd multiply each term by our x minus 4, x plus 3, and you'll get the same thing. So here, my x minus 4's cancel. I have 1 times x plus 3, so I have x plus 3. Right here, my x plus 3's cancel. 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. And then over here, the x minus 4's cancel, x plus 3's cancel, and I'm left with 10. I'm going to combine my like terms. X and 2x is 3x. 3 and negative 8 is negative 5 equals 10. I'm going to take my 5 over to the right because my variables are on the left. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And I get 3x equals 15. Divide by 3. And x equals 5. Now, is that one okay? Yeah, it just can't be 4 or negative 3. Okay, that's the only rules to that, okay? You gotta just double check to make sure it's not a restriction, all right? Okay, let's see. Oh, good, the long ones are over. Right here, first thing I'm going to do, there are 4 ways that you can solve quadratics, things with x squares. It is factoring. You could factor it. You could use square root property, as long as you do not have no middle term, one of those bx, because remember it's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. As long as there's no bx, then you can use square root property. You can do complete the square. Most of you will not. It's not difficult. You just won't. It's not the way you'll choose. And the last thing is quadratic formula. Now, I told you this in class. If you don't know the quadratic formula and you try to use it, I'm not giving you any credit. Okay? That in order to use a quadratic formula, you have to know it. It's x equals negative b plus or minus a square root of b squared minus 4ac all over the whole thing 2a. Okay? So, I always look to factor first. This one will factor. It factors as y plus 5 times y plus 5. That's not how I would write it, but it's okay. I would write it as the quantity of y plus 5 squared. Because these are the same, you only have to solve only one of them. Y plus 5 equals 0. So our y is equal to a negative 5. And you can check this answer. When you plug this in here, it gives us 25 minus 50. That gives us a negative 25 plus 25 gives us 0. Or let your calculator do the work. Okay, in order to solve quadratics, first of all, we have a b, so you can't do this, okay? So you rather factor, and yeah, you could complete the square here. But again, you can only complete the square if you don't have a number here. But let's be real. You're rather going to factor, you're going to use quadratic formula, okay? So, in order to do either of those, you have to have it set equal to 0. So I got to take that negative 25 to the other side by adding it. Which means on the left-hand side, I'm going to get 9u squared minus 30 plus 25 equals 0. Now, if you want, I know this is this is a perfect square. Okay? This gives us 3u. This gives me 5. Because that's negative, this can be minus, and it factors like that. 9u minus 5, 9u minus 5. I know this is right. I know that shortcut, the rule. But if I wanted to check it, square this term, it gives us 9u squared. To get the middle term, oops, this had a u, sorry. You multiply these two and get 15u and times it by 2 to get the negative 30. And then you square that and get positive. So that's how it factors. Again, we have 2 of them, so I only need to... Now, I'm going to use square root property. You can just say 5u minus 5, but I'm just going to show the square root property because these are, and again, it doesn't have to be 0 over here to use square root property, but because I want to get rid of it, I'm just going to take square root of both sides. And I get 3u minus 5 equals 0. I would put plus or minus, but 0 is neither positive or negative. I'm going to add 5 to both sides, so I get 3u equals 5. Divide by 3, and u equals 5/3. Now you didn't have to do that. You could have said, okay, it's 3u minus 5 times 3u minus 5. And see how these are the same, so you only need to set one equal to 0, like that. And then add 5 to both sides, and you get this. Okay. Okay, here, again, you can do this 2 different ways, but because we don't have a b term, we just have a perfect square and a perfect square, it's easiest if you do this. Take square root of both sides because a square root will undo a square. So I have v. Because the square root was not there, we had to do that. We had to put that in. It's a positive and a negative 10. Now, you could have taken the 100 to the other side by subtracting it and got this. And then that's a difference of 2 squares. V plus 10, V minus 10 equals 0. And then you still get a positive and a negative 10. Now, it says simplify your answer as much as possible. This one here, it doesn't say simplify to a decimal. It says simplify your answer as much as possible. Now, when you do this, again, I'm going to use the square root property because I don't have a b term. You can use quadratic formula, just make sure you take the 24 to the other side because it won't factor. This one did. But if you're going to use quadratic formula, you have to set it equal to 0 first, and then your b term would be 0. But here I'm going to get x equals a positive and negative square root of 24. If this had said round to the nearest whatever, then you would plug that in your calculator and do that. But because it says simplify, this is what they're wanting. What's the biggest perfect square that goes into 24, which is 4? It's 4 times 6. Well, I can take the square root of 4 to get 2. So my answer here is plus or minus 2 times the square root of 6. That is my simplified answer. Now, for this one right here, the hard way is to multiply this out, okay, and get w squared minus 2w plus 1 minus 48 equals 0. Get w squared minus 2w minus 47 equals 0, and use the quadratic formula. I, however, am lazy, and I don't want to do that, okay? I'm going to use the square root property. So I'm going to take this, I'm just going to rewrite it over here so I can work it. Okay, for square root property, I got to get the squared part by itself. So I'm going to take that 48 to the other side by adding it. So I'm going to get w minus 1 squared equals 48. Now I have the squared part by itself. To get rid of a square, I take the square root because that's what will undo it. Those are opposite. They're inverses of each other. Well, if I do that to that side, I must do it to this side. So over here, I get w minus 1. Over here, I get plus or minus the square root, and I'm going to simplify this. 16 is the largest perfect square that goes into 48. 16 times 3. So, I'm going to do, because I'm talking and you can rewatch this or slow it down or whatever, pause it. I'm going to do some things all at once. Okay, first of all, square root of 16 is 4. Now, I need to get this 1 over here. I'm going to do that by adding it. So, my answer now is going to be W equals 1 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 3. So one of my answers is 1 plus 4 times the square root of 3, and the other answer is 1 minus 4 times the square root of 3. Okay, right here, discriminant. Discriminant is this part of the quadratic formula, what's underneath the radical, b squared minus 4ac. So this is set equal to 0, so that's good. My b is 4, so I'm going to say 4 squared minus 4 times my a, which is negative 4, times my c, which is negative 1. So this gives me 16. 3 negatives give me a negative 16, which gives me 0. So my discriminant is 0. So that means there's only one answer. I told you didn't really have to know that. There's only one real answer. It's repeated. I told you didn't have to know that, but it just, because you could use quadratic or you could factor. Like me, I would have factored that. I would have factored out a negative 1 first, so I would have gotten 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. And then I would have factored this 2x minus 1 and 2x minus 1. Okay. And then when I set this equal to 0 and solve, I'd get 1/2. When I set this equal to 0 and solve, I get a positive 1/2. So see, I only had one answer. I don't worry about that negative 1. It doesn't have an x. That's all I'm concerned about. Okay, again, it would be okay if you didn't know that. You'll get through life. You'll just solve it. You just have to do more work than you'd have to and say, oh, well, what's underneath the radical is this? And I had 1 or I had 2 answers. Okay, whatever it happens to be. Or no answers. If your discriminant's negative, then you'd have no real solution. Okay, use quadratic formula to solve. So right here, negative b, so it's going to be negative 4, or the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root. Now, if you only partly know the quadratic formula, you get no credit. Remember, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I would sing, but I can't sing. So this reads as negative b, but it also means the opposite of b. Well, b is a positive 4, so when we plug it in, it's negative. Now, plus or minus the square root, b squared, b is 4 squared, minus 4 times my a, which is 2, times my c, which is negative 9. All over 2 times my a, which is 2. Now you simplify. You get negative 4 plus or minus the square root. This gives me 16 plus 72. Sorry, don't have my calculator. Having to work for it, and I get 88. Okay, I just hope I'm doing everything right, because I do not have you all to tell me that I'm doing it wrong and I don't have my answers. So I guess you'll tell me if I'm wrong. I'll get you in a text or something. Okay, okay, all over 4. The problem with this is there's a perfect square. I can rewrite that. Okay, so I can rewrite that as negative 4 plus or minus. This is the square root of 4 times 22 all over 4. Well, right here, I can pull out a 2. So, because we always have to simplify, 4 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 22 all over 4. Now, This can be reduced. 2 will go into all of them. I could factor out a 2 and cancel it out, okay? So the way I do it is I say 2 goes into 4, negative 4 2 times, 2 goes into 2 1 time, and 2 goes into 4 2 times. I'm reducing each one of these by 2. And that will give me negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 22 all over 2. And that's my answer. Okay. And number 21, and I'll stop this video after this. Okay, again it says quadratic, so we're going to use quadratic formula. Okay, so x is equal to negative b, which is negative 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so it's 3 squared. Even if this had been a negative, you still would get a positive 9. Be careful if your b is negative. It wasn't though. Minus 4 times my a, which is 3, times my c, which is negative 5, all over 2 times my a, which is 3. Okay, so I have negative 3 plus or minus the square root. This gives me 9. This gives me a positive 20, positive 60. So I get a positive 69. All over 6. And I think that's all. Let me just make sure. Well, yeah, and that's it. Sorry, just had to double check my answer to make sure. I'm using my calculator on my phone. All right, that's the end of that one.